Well, I think we can start right now. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today with Annette Bramley, and we are going to talk about research collaboration. We have the chat open for you. You can make any comments, any questions along the webinar, so please feel free to pop them in at any time. If we run out of time and we have some questions unanswered, we will email you with the answers. The webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a follow-up email with the link, so you can watch it on demand at your own leisure. I want to welcome and thank you, Annette, for being with us today. Annette is the Director and Chief Collaboration Officer at N8 Research Partnership. She is also a public speaker and an ambassador for excellent collaborative research. With a first-class degree and DPhil in material science from Oxford University, she brings real-world understanding from the lab, combined with experience of more than 20 years guiding researchers from a range of disciplines at the Engineering and Physical Science Research Counseling. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us, Annette.
Thank you, Azahara. It's an absolute delight to be here and to be talking about something which I'm completely passionate about. So let me just share my screen so that I can talk to a few slides, and then I really hope that there's going to be some questions, because otherwise it's going to be a very short webinar. So can I just chat? I think you should be able to see my screen.
Yeah, we can see your screen. Thank you.
That's great. So yeah, so as Azahara said, this is me. I'm the director of the N8, and for anyone who doesn't know what the N8 is, we are a strategic research alliance between the 8 most research-intensive universities in the north of England. So my day job is all about encouraging universities and people within universities to work together, and that starts at the top, right from the vice chancellors, and propagates all the way through the universities. And we have collaborations of technicians working together around net zero campuses, for example. So collaboration takes place at all levels across the N8. It can be for literally everybody. So yeah, my passion is bringing people from different backgrounds together so that they can grow and bring out the best in themselves and each other, and make a tangible, genuine and long-lasting impact on the world. And I'm not going to read through the rest of it, but you can look up my bio on LinkedIn if you want to read more or connect. I wrote this book as a collaboration, appropriately, with Liz Ogilvie. Liz has over 20 years experience in facilitation and leadership development. So one of the things that makes this book really practical is Liz's hands-on experience in workshops and facilitations, in trying to bring people together in really practical ways. And some of the tips for doing that in a real world situation in those kind of facilitation settings that are in the book are a result of Liz's many years of experience. And that's one of the things which hopefully people can, draw on from the book to really put these methods into practice and make a difference in their own practice and in their own institutions. But why did we want to write this book? I'm sure I'm like preaching to the choir when I say that collaboration is an intrinsic feature of research in the 21st century, and it allows researchers and teams of researchers to be agile, to lend their skills to a range of different projects and problems. But both Liz and I have seen time and time again that for various reasons, and despite best efforts of people involved, some collaborations can flounder and can be really hard to get them off the ground. And we believe, Liz and I believe, that being able to collaborate is a foundational, transformational practice that drives individuals, teams and organisations to be better at problem solving, to be more innovative, to be less siloed, and ultimately to be more effective. And not only that, if you look at all the evidence on collaboration, it's positively correlated with healthy research cultures. And, you know, in the UK and across the world, making sure we have healthy research cultures is, you know, hugely topical and being driven right from the tops of institutions for lots of different reasons, but ultimately it's the right thing to do. And many of the behaviours that are associated with collaboration are also associated with healthy research cultures. One of the things we observe, though, is that collaborative practice often gets taken for granted because it's thought about, or some people think that it's the same as teamwork, but it isn't. And I just want to, okay, I'm just going to say something about that and then skip back. So collaboration compared to teamwork. So both collaboration and teamwork are groups of people working together to achieve a shared goal. Where they start to like diverge is in how that shared goal is achieved. In a team, what often happens is that you have a fairly linear breakdown of individual tasks, and people within the team complete their part of the task or their role, and that contributes to the team goal. So you can think about maybe a football team. You know, you have your strikers, you have your midfield defenders, your goalie. Your goalie doesn't run up the wing, and no, not usually, maybe apart from like very late in the game, but generally, you know, people have their individual tasks, and they do those really well, and that contributes to the team goal. And very much people are playing to their strengths, which I believe is really important. Whereas in collaboration, it's much more about sharing the creation, coming up with the ideas or the decisions together to complete a goal or solve a problem. And you might not necessarily even agree why a problem is important. You might have differing agendas, but solving that problem or finding a solution is important for everybody. So as I said, in a team, a complicated system is an outcome is predictable in the sum of the components. So you might think about a very project plan. A friend of mine always used to say, building a shed, you know, you define your shed and what it's going to look like, and what the roof's going to be like, and where you're going to put the door, that kind of thing. So you can add it up. In a collaboration, there's often a complex system, and the outcomes are emergent, which means you can't necessarily predict them at the start. And very much in organizations, when you think about organizational level collaboration and the structures of organizations, they're very much complex systems, and that you can pull on what you think is a good lever to incentivize a certain type of behavior, and it doesn't necessarily end up with the outcomes that you wanted. So you might pull on a lever to say, we want all of these high impact factor journal publications, and what you might find is that as a result you get some unwanted behaviors that we've seen in terms of research integrity, for example. You know, those kinds of things might not necessarily be predictable. And teamwork, again, is based on completing certain tasks, performing a prescribed role. In collaboration, it's really based on shared values. Shared values are super important for collaboration. And in teams, generally, leadership and the sharing of power is hierarchical. So you have a team leader, and he or she, they allocate certain people different amounts of power, delegated levels of authority to complete certain tasks. Whereas in a collaboration, leadership tends to be more by consent. I mean, there may be some degree of hierarchy, but generally there's a degree of consent and more power sharing. So whereas lots of organizations train people in team working, there's some subtleties around collaboration which don't often get trained as part of, you know, standard kind of training courses. And that's one of the reasons that we wrote this book, was that we felt that we could really add value to the experiences of people and give people tools and techniques for collaborating that they weren't getting elsewhere. So just to go back slightly, our goals and hopes were to give the reader skills for and an understanding of research collaboration, more confidence in going into collaboration from being able to work, on themselves or an organisational or a team level, and to help change for the better collaborative practice and research cultures, and to help researchers tackle seriously important and exciting questions. There are huge problems facing us, climate change being just one of them, that require input from lots of disciplines, right across the arts and humanities, social sciences, and into the STEM subjects. And I know we're talking about physics for the Institute of Physics, but these sort of behaviours and understandings are equally important when you're working in big collaborative teams within a single discipline, but the difference between theoretical physics and experimental physics also might be culturally quite different. So there are some foundational skills in the book which we hope will be useful. So we've structured the book so that in each chapter there's a summary of key learning points at the end, and most have some tips or exercises that you can use either by yourself or with a group to improve your collaborative skills. So the first chapter really sets out the what and why of research collaboration. Why would you do it? A bit about, as I've taught, the difference between teamwork and collaboration, the difference between collaboration and cooperation, and the difference between collaboration and competition, which is kind of a combination of cooperation and competition. So some of those kind of foundational understandings, so that we're kind of all on the same page, and why we think that this is important. The next 3 chapters are where all the kind of hints and tips and hacks are. So it starts from looking at yourself as an individual. What's your mindset? How do you show up when you go into a collaboration? How might you think about developing yourself? Should that be something which you want to do? And I would, one thing I would say is that collaboration isn't for everybody, and it isn't always all the time. But the first chapter looks at yourself. The second chapter. The third chapter is about a team level collaboration, and then the fourth chapter is about teams of teams, essentially. So that could be a department, a faculty, organisation. So you could be looking at university structures there, and with other organisations. So you could be looking at an industry partner, for example, working with an academic partner, and how the cultures of those organisations meet in a collaboration. But that could equally be the different cultures between different disciplines. So between different STEM disciplines, or with arts and humanities disciplines, or between the two. So it's applicable on lots of different dimensions. And then the last chapter is a bit of a crystal ball gazing chapter about the future. When we were writing the book, which was before the pandemic, this chapter was all going to be about online collaboration, and then of course the pandemic happened, and everything we were thinking was in the pipeline but might take 5 to 10 years kind of happened overnight. And so that was back to the drawing board for that chapter. But so it's a bit of a crystal ball gazing there. What might the future hold for collaboration, specifically in relation to research? And I'd say the best way to read it in the first instance would be to read it kind of sequentially in the first place, because we build through the book. So we talk about the skills for yourself, but some of that is obviously relevant to your team and your organisation. Obviously, we don't go back over them. So we don't repeat what we've said about collaborative leadership, which we cover in the chapter about teams. We don't cover it again at a team level for the chapter about organisations, but what we do cover in that chapter is things which are more relevant to the kind of teams of teams leadership. And leadership is important in both contexts. So through the book, we apply established models to research collaboration. So this, for example, is the cultural web. It's a well-established tool developed by two academics in the fields of business, leadership and management, called Jerry Johnson. Jerry Johnson and Kevin Scholes. Sorry, that's an error on my slide there. So it's Jerry Johnson and Kevin Scholes. This should be the Johnson and Scholes cultural web. And it can be used to map organisational culture. And what it does is it breaks organisational culture into these 6 factors, so stories, rituals and routines, symbols, organisational structure, power structure and control systems. And we have applied it, so they talk about organisational culture, but we've used this tool to really look at the lens of research collaborative culture, and then used some case studies to illustrate various examples of how that might be applied or can be used to look at various different case studies of research collaboration. And some of these models aren't well known outside of the organisational management and leadership literature. And we wanted to bring some of these models and understandings to research collaboration and to people doing that practice, so that they would be able to use them as part of what they do. So, for example, some of the things. So one of the things we look at is the Lancaster University Research Institutes, and we look at that through the lens of the cultural web. And the reason for having these research institutes is to foster interdisciplinary relationships by having a sort of a cross-cutting element in the organisational structure. And then these hold regular events and workshops, team building, mentoring, research retreats and newsletters. So that's one of the examples that we use, and we get into a bit more detail in the book of how that then maps onto the cultural web. And another case study that we look at very early on in the book actually is the UCL Ventura case study. Now, for those of you who might not have heard of this, this is an extraordinary challenge. In the early days of COVID-19 pandemic, some researchers from UCL, but also McCarran Paratrain from UCLH, got together. You remember about what it was like in the days of the ventilator challenge, and I don't want to spoil the story in the book. You should go and read it. But basically, they came together to reverse engineer what they call a continuous pressure airway. Oh no, I've forgotten. a CPAP device, which basically is what you see, the device that goes on the front of people's mouths and provides pressurized oxygen and helps keep people out of off of ventilators and out of the intensive care units. And so we talk about this amazing collaboration in the book. And one of the things about this team is that in the early days of the pandemic, when London was shutting down, they realised that they'd all sort of gone into London to help with this enormous project, and they'd literally brought no clothes with them, and so they had to send somebody out, one of the engineers out into St Pancras station, as it was all, everything was shutting down, to find some clean clothes, and they all ended up with these Buenaventura t-shirts, and it's their kind of voluntary dress code, and it's a bit of an in-joke, but it really also cemented the sense of all being it together, and actually gave the name to the project. That's why the device is called UCL Ventura, is literally because of these t-shirts. And it's just again, it's the importance of a symbol in bringing people together, and getting behind something, and cementing their relationship from different organisations, different backgrounds, or as I say, all in a hotel when London was shutting down around them. And something else we talk about is why certain skills and mindsets are important. So talk a lot in the book about the importance of language, the importance about communicating clearly. And the reason for that is that it's not about dumbing down. It's a very clear statement about saying, I want to share the power of my knowledge and my understanding with you so that we can work together as equals, so that we can find a solution to this situation or this challenge, which we both agree is a problem. And as I said before, we might not agree why it's a problem, but we both agree it's a problem and we both want to find a solution to this. And it does require time, and it does require effort to make sure that everyone can participate equally in a collaborative project, but it's absolutely key in laying the foundations for the successful collaborative relationship. And again, one of the things that we talk about in the book is why relationships are so important for collaboration. I keep reaching over here because this is where my copy of the book is. So lots of hacks in the book. This is one that I've talked about before in another presentation, but one of the hacks is to slow down. So when we're excited about a new project or an idea, it's really easy to rush headlong in and not to take the time to make sure we've all understood, for example, what some of the jargon means. So some words can mean different things to different people. If we don't slow down, we might leap to a solution before really having a full understanding of the problem space, and then come up with a solution which doesn't really fit the needs of, isn't quite right. When if we'd have slowed down and properly understood the problem space, we'd have come up with maybe a range of solutions, and then we could have picked the best one. Whereas if we go for the first one, often the first one that we think of is the most obvious one, but it isn't necessarily the best one. And if we're trying to build relationships again, which I've spoken about as being really important to collaboration, going back to the language point, if we're going to have a relationship which is going to underpin the collaboration over multiple projects, having that common language is a real investment in that relationship, and it's investment in the relationship for a long term and not just a short term relationship. So that's one of the hacks, but there's lots of other hacks in the book that you can find out more about if you read it. And so this is obviously the links to get to it. And I did a Physics World podcast as well, which might be interesting for some people that are watching this. And I did a little piece on the role of language in research collaboration for as part of an event for the Energy Systems Catapult. And there's the link there that you could follow if you're interested in you're going to get that and a few more hacks for collaborating and being clear with your language around collaborating. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank all the people that we interviewed for this book, allowed us to reproduce their figures, provided jokes, because yes, there are jokes in the book, and took the time and trouble to provide feedback. So we tested it out on, again, everyone from a brand new PhD student to a Deputy Vice Chancellor in English literature, to make sure that it would be useful and that it was intelligible, that our language was communicating well across all disciplines. So really so grateful to all of those people, and for everybody who have supported us, and of course IAP Publishing for commissioning the work, and to our consultant editor Jo, and to Zahara for arranging this webinar. So also thank you to you for listening and hopefully downloading, reading, applying, and actually using some of what you learn. And I'm hoping that there's lots of questions, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Annette. So please send us your questions, pop up your questions on the chat, and we will be happy to answer them. I have a couple of questions already here with me, Annette, for you. So some people just seem to get collaboration, the concept of collaboration, people that are really curious and collaborative by nature. So how can research managers identify such people within their teams, and how they can guide them, the guidance to load like the collaborative projects?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. And I guess in responding to that, I would make some assumptions on the basis of the question. The research, the people are sort of in the orbit of the research manager. So not looking at someone who's a long way distant in an organizational hierarchy, for example, but people that are kind of in the orbit of someone who's managing a team. And I guess my perspective is you'd likely observe some of those behaviours and mindsets. So I'd be thinking about, so one of the things we talk about in the book is a proactive mindset compared to a defensive mindset. And a proactive mindset is one where there's a strong set of core values and ethics, which enables individuals to maybe be less defensive in certain situations and to have a kind of very flexible style. You'd see people who look at the bigger picture often, who are able to deal with kind of ambiguity and shades of grey, looking for the, as you say, the curiosity, looking for the kind of those opportunities in, where things aren't quite so black and white. Are they interested in looking outside of their immediate project? Are they wanting to get involved in those kinds of things that are, showing their curiosity? And also, are they happy to share information and knowledge and resources, to do with others to achieve a bigger or a common goal? Or are they kind of, wanting to kind of keep that to themselves because they see it as power? So I think there's some kind of really interesting things there. But I think really my reflection would be, if you're a research manager with those people around you, you probably have a fairly good sense of that from just watching how they work. I guess my other reflections on the question, which was, I think, how do you give them scope and permission? Was, I would suggest always kind of starting small, but not giving yourself a ceiling, but aiming high, but not trying to do the big, walk before you can run, I guess is the thing. So don't go straight into trying to run large multi-million-pound research projects. Don't set people up to fail, but what can you do with what you have? How can you lay the ground for their success? And I think I also said in the presentation, like, collaboration isn't for everyone all the time. And there's going to be people in the team that don't want to do collaboration and aren't interested. They want to do their project and their thing, and they want to go deep in their thing. And that's okay, as part of a bigger organization, that can be fine. And you can support collaboration by also kind of getting out of the way of people who do want to do collaborate, and not feeling threatened by people who want to do collaboration. And and thinking about some of that, and maybe sort of in that way turning them into kind of cheerleaders and enablers for the collaborative, you know, and vice versa, right? For the collaborators to be cheerleaders for the people who want to go deep, because I think there's a lot of reciprocity in that.
Yeah, very key points in that answer. Thank you. In terms of relationship building and based on your experience, do you find that researchers are willing to come together where the goal is simply to make connections with others rather than having a goal in mind, such as an upcoming funding call?
I think it's always easier when there's uh, a, an incentive, right? Because to do collaboration takes time. I think, you know, I probably said that about 100 times in the presentation, but it does take time, it takes effort, and none of that is free in kind of cash terms, but there's also the opportunity cost of what you're not doing if you're doing that kind of getting to know other people. And some of it can be motivated by kind of intrinsic curiosity, but having some incentives and some permission, either tacit or kind of inferred, to get involved in that is yeah, definitely a help. I think sometimes the funding pot also can get in the way. Like if the prize is so big, again, it's that kind of balance between where's the desirable behaviours and what might that what might be some of the unintended consequences of that. But generally, yeah, it is easy if there's an incentive.
Definitely. So how can research managers showcase those that they are really high performance collaborative people within the teams, and use those success stories to send further collaboration efforts?
Yeah, I think that's super important. I mean, stories is an important part of the cultural web. And that, you know, the stories you tell about, or the stories an organization or a research manager tells about who are the people that are, you know, who's doing great work in this team is really important. So, but again, I think it depends on what level you're at. Something really simple as kind of highlighting something in a team meeting, for example, if that's the kind of level we're talking, and really demonstrating sort of in a semi-public environment that this is the kind of stuff that we value. These are the kind of behaviours that we want to see. We want to see more, without, you know, you don't have to say that this is good or this that something else isn't good, if you know what I mean, but just highlighting these are really good things. This is the kind of these are the stories we want to see. These may be the people that we're recommending for performance increments. They're all good ways of doing that. And at a sort of an organizational level, you know, then you have like your internal newsletters, you have the stuff that goes on your website, you know, what goes on your social media. I mean, we do a lot of the NA picking up, you know, examples that we see of our universities being collaborative, winning money, you know, just all of that stuff is really important as part of the cultural web, and a potential lever for changing.
Cool, thank you so much. Somebody in the audience is interested in the role organizations can play in nurturing cross-disciplinary collaboration. They sometimes come up against the belief that you have to first be an expert in the discipline before you can venture into interdisciplinary collaboration. In their experience, that isn't usually the case, but they will welcome hearing your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that as a I concur with the person in the audience. I mean, I've heard people say that, and I think there is a school of thought, and I think there is, you know, that in the kind of organizational structures that we have, you know, there is a need for people to be able to demonstrate that they have credibility as a researcher within usually their kind of home school, because, you know, and by that I mean faculty or discipline. So I understand that need to do that in order to kind of secure career progression, because it's not so easy with the way organizations are structured to progress a career that's multidisciplinary, and that's, you know, one of the challenges with the structures that we have. On the other hand, I have also seen fantastic examples of where at relatively early stage in their career, postdoctoral researchers and, you know, really early career academics have entered into multidisciplinary collaborations and have generated really high impact publications, and brought in funding again, which is obviously, you know, again, a key metric for our organizations. And you can develop new thinking and that still challenges the kind of home discipline from looking at problems which are multidisciplinary or lie outside of that space. Yeah, I mean, maths is a good example because I used to look after maths at EPSLC. You know, there are some really challenging real world problems which pose really hard questions for mathematics or the mathematical sciences, which might come from a very applied setting, which you kind of might not think of as, you know, in the first instance, you know, a place where maths would be, or you would find new maths, but actually because the real world is hard and messy, it can actually ask some really challenging questions of the fundamental discipline. So I don't think it's always either or. I think there can be benefits and really interesting questions for the fundamental discipline from those multidisciplinary collaborations, and that it's great for early career researchers to be doing kind of both and.
Thank you. In your presentation, you referred to the importance of clear communications for collaboration. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's absolutely one of the things that I'm super passionate about, because I've seen so many times how small misunderstandings around language can cost time, frankly, in collaborations. And sometimes I demonstrate this by getting people to pop in on a poll, for example, what they think of when they hear a particular word. So one of my favorite examples for this is network. Okay, so like, you know, you can even do this kind of as you're watching the presentation, you just think of, okay, well, what immediately comes to my mind when I think of the word network? Like, for some people, that might be a network of people, like might be a LinkedIn network. For other people, it might be a communications network. For other people, it might be kind of more mathematical network. So there's, you know, that's just one example. Another example, that example that's actually in the book is sensitivity. So again, you know, you can just think to yourself, well, what does that mean to me? You know, and that, you know, that has lots of different meanings in different contexts. You know, it could be an emotional context, it could be a sort of touch kind of context, But the example in the book is an analytical context. So the collaboration involved John Gherkin at Durham, who's a professor, I think, of biophysics, and that he was working in a collaboration with some chemists, and they were confused. They were both, you know, progressing this project, and it was to develop a microfluidics production line. And they had this. They were trying to reach a certain degree of sensitivity, and the physicists were like, yeah, you know, this is all going really well, and we've got the required degree of sensitivity, and we're kind of wanting to move on to the next bit of the project. And the chemists are like, but you know, we haven't got the right level of sensitivity. And they were kind of the project was like starting to diverge. And somebody eventually said, well, what is it that you mean by sensitivity? And you know, it wasn't clear, you know, initially that this was the key, obviously, because they went on for about 6 months. And then somebody said, what actually do you mean by sensitivity? And the physicist definition was the smallest amount you could measure. And but the chemist definition was the smallest amount you could measure accurately and knowing that amount. So there was just a subtle difference, but what it meant was that the project was starting to diverge. And once they figured out, well, what's actually the important definition of sensitivity in this use case, which was for the industrial microfluidic production line, they could figure out what the definition of sensitivity there was that they needed to be using, and then they could all go forward together. But they wasted about 6 months of kind of, you know, time and effort. And in the end, they installed the solution onto the production line of the company. They got loads of great publications out. It's all like happy ever after. But nevertheless, it did waste kind of 6 months of time. And that's again why, for me, taking care to like really slow down at the beginning of a collaboration and understand, well, what are we meaning by these terms? And so another hack I would offer for people watching who want to who maybe wants to get into collaboration is that, you know, that and again, coming back to that earlier question about how do you enable people as a research manager, is to practice having lots of conversations in kind of low stakes about your research with other people, so you get to find out what are the terms that get misunderstood when you talk to people outside your immediate discipline about your research, because then you'll know, I need to slow down and I need to define this for people outside of my immediate project team. And that could even be other people in your department. You know, you have to go very far before, you know, particular jargon starts to mean different things to different people, or they start making assumptions about what it means, and then you can just go off on a totally different tangent. So yeah, I mean, we spend quite a lot of time in the book talking about the importance of language, how you can be more clear, how like other tips and techniques as well for being clearer with language, but that's a couple of them for sure.
We have somebody in the audience that is a new master's student, and they would like to know, and do you have any suggestions on how to have international research collaboration for master's students? As they are new students on their master degree, they are still figuring out about that.
Yeah, so I mean, so as a master's student, having an international research collaboration is going to be tricky, but just because where you are in the landscape of globally and the nature of research. But I would say the first step for me would be, there's so many, we're on a webinar now, there's so many webinars that you can and kind of conference type online events that you can attend, you know, basically for free, that you could never have gone to 5 years ago. And going to some of those webinars, seminars, and hearing people talk, and then looking them up. If you know, if you're interested, say then in going to a PhD, which is probably where kind of the base level of collaboration is, it is certainly in the STEM disciplines, you could then be talking to people about PhDs, and entering into it that way. I think it depends. I don't know too much about collaboration at as a master's level student, but that would be kind of my advice, I think.
Great, thank you. Slightly of tangent here to the discussion, but somebody would like to know, as we see an increase in interdisciplinary funding opportunities, how can funding agencies tackle the challenge of peer review for this type of research?
Yeah, so
that's a difficult one.
So I mean, like, I would want to ideally unpack that question. Like, having done multidisciplinary peer review for basically a job, and peer review generally is under so much pressure. But I think one of the challenges is that, researchers and peer review are under so much pressure that this kind of taking the time to slow down is really hard. And if you're going to review a research proposal which sits tangentially, potentially, to your kind of main there's that risk that you could read it and you could read a term, and because you're in a rush, your brain says, oh, okay, that in my world, network means da, 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 and then you kind of misunderstand what the proposal is really about. And it's not because you're deliberately trying to be awkward. You're not trying to be reviewer too, but it's just like everyone is under so much pressure that sometimes these things happen. And so often you get that kind of, that it's harder for multidisciplinary research to get funded. And what I would say is, when I worked for EPSRC and we saw peer review in healthcare technologies, if you looked at the kind of absolute scores that proposals might get based on the the reviewer reports, or in panels, they would generally be a bit lower than you might see in a single discipline panel. And I think that is kind of a reflection of the importance of constituting panels to look at interdisciplinary research proposals, because then you are able to then take some of that. I just think there's something different about looking at a single discipline compared to a multidiscipline, where you're getting those mixtures of perspectives from lots of different places, and it's never going to satisfy everybody. Whereas it's in a single discipline that it is somehow more likely that you get, the top end of the, more things get ranked at the top end of the scale. And so I do think there is something about that, and recognizing that those types of proposals do need to be kind of considered together. I'm not like a big fan of like just giving them an extra point or something, because I just think that's, it's a bit artificial, it's a bit arbitrary, like, is it going to make any difference? But you could think of, like, if you wanted to think outside the box, you could think of doing lots of different methods of peer review. Like, why do we do it the way we do it? Why do we send out these forms? Could we do something more discursive, like we're doing now, between the two peer reviewers from a different discipline, and coming up with a consensus review, for example? There's loads of scope for experimentation in that kind of field, which could be really exciting. My perspective, this is my perspective, that most people doing peer review are genuinely doing the best job that they can in the time that they have, and the same for the funding agencies. like they're doing that, and we just have to try and do the, you know, there's never going to be a perfect answer, right? And some people are always going to be unhappy because they didn't get funded, and it's not always for the reasons that they think. And so I guess the other that would be the other point would be feedback is really important.
Mm-hmm. Somebody in the audience is a PhD student from Sudan, and they would like to know if you could, provide like what are the opportunities for creating research collaboration with developing African countries?
Yeah. So I think at Annette, we have a relationship with the African Research Universities Association, ARUA, and what we've done, or not me, but what our international research managers have done there, is to really build like very equal relationships with the ARUA partners, talking around like global centres of excellence, and really it's working. That sounds really obvious, but like actually enabling the African universities to state what it is that they are interested in doing, and not assuming that it's what the, you know, what are as the UK research intensive universities might be interested in, but saying what are you interested in and how might we help you answer some of those challenges, because we also think they're interesting. And so I think that's the kind of thing is, you know, treating everybody as equals, in that, you know, everybody has something to bring to the table, lived experience, research knowledge. It could be, you know, if you're a clinician in a health setting, you know, valuing all of that knowledge equally and then co-producing the research is so important. I mean, it's obviously really unfortunate that some of the so it's become less easy for UK partners to collaborate, you know, with the changes to the funding of Global Challenges Research Fund that happens. But there are still ways that the UK universities do that and are keen to work with partners all over the world, including Africa.
Somebody in the audience they say they are in their 50s and had a collaboration only in their own country. So how can they find an international researcher to collaborate with them?
So my reflection is I'm in my 50s and I hope that I've got quite a lot of working life left. So I don't think there's any wrong time to start these kinds of things, right? That would be my first observation. And for me, it's not so much about where people are in the world, it's about what's the challenge that we both want to work on. So if you want to find, like, what my sort of question would be, so what's the need to find an international collaborator outside your own country, and what's driving that? You know, and if it's because you want to work together on a specific physics problem, then the first step is, well, obviously you need to identify some of those people, and you probably don't want to identify, if you're just starting to collaborate outside your own country, you probably don't want to, you know, go to the top name in the field, right? Because, you know, they're probably very busy, not got much time for somebody who's just embarking on this, but you want to go and find somebody else who's working in that area, that is doing something you think is interesting and is probably in their mid-career as well, or early career, and that you have something to share with them. And, you know, you might say, get in touch with them and say, I'm looking at your research, I think it's really interesting. I have this perspective on this challenge, for example. And you've got to be willing to share, you've got to be willing to build a relationship with people. And you might get a few knockbacks. I mean, that's kind of life. But if that's what you want to do, and you've got some interesting, you know, go to some of those webinars, go and hear what they have to say. And people are astonishingly open, is my experience for people that are genuinely interested in their research, and are trying to add something to what they're doing.
Great, thank you. Somebody would like to know if you could talk about the process to admission steps to get a PhD research collaboration.
So well, that's a really tough question, because each university and globally, like it's different, right? But I would say that, for example, in the UK, some of the most multidisciplinary sort of PhD training opportunities are through centres for doctoral training. So they're the kind of structures that I would be looking at if I was interested in multidisciplinary research collaboration, and that they might not be available to all international students, for example, but it might be that there's some projects affiliated with sort of those kinds of structures that you could join. But the benefit of those is that they have like usually they have like a cohort. So especially in the multidisciplinary areas, there's a cohort of PhD students, and that really enables you as well to learn the collaborative skills alongside of the research skills. So things like that, and then you might have to look for similar structures to those outside of the UK, because I'm not an expert on PhD training globally, and I wouldn't want to give any bad advice.
Cool. Thank you so much, Annette. I would like to carry on talking the whole day, but unfortunately we ran out of time. It's almost 3 o'clock here in England. So thank you so much for everybody to attend the webinar. I hope you learned as much as I've learned. Thank you so much, Annette. It's been amazing and a great experience to be able to run a webinar with you. And I'll leave you all to carry on with the rest of the day. As I mentioned at the beginning, this webinar has been recorded, so you will receive an email with a link for you to watch on demand any time that you want. Thank you so much, everybody.